I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Dr. Kamal Munir. Hi, Kamal.
Hi, Clark. Thank you. And hello, everyone.
Well, it's great to have you with us today, and for everyone's, I suppose, knowledge of the structure of this session, we'll be having a bit of a chat about some of the key lessons from this week in the first half of the session, a bit of reflection on the assignment. Both Kamal and I have reviewed them, some really interesting variety there, some great ideas, a lot of imagination, which was all great to see. So we'll reflect on that a little bit and then look ahead a bit towards the platform strategies that we'll be looking at in Module 4. This will also be an open Q&A session, so please use the, right on cue, program support. If you want to submit more of a, I suppose, structured question, please use the Q&A box. I'll answer some of those along the way, but in the second half, we'll have more of a formal Q&A. So please use those. We'll get to those in the second half. Don't worry if I don't address them straight away. It's just because they're really good and we want to give them some time. So if that all sounds good to everyone, I guess we'll kick things off properly. I'll hand you over to Kamal for some reflections on week 3 and the module that we've just completed.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Clark. And hello again, everyone. And it's good to see, yes, numbers are going up in the box. And so let me start off with what this exercise was all about. Hopefully you enjoyed this exercise. And, it was essentially about something that we discussed last time, which was that one of the major sources of disruption in today's world is that the boundaries of industry are dissolving. Industry was a concept on which strategy relied for a very long time. And we used to define industry as a group of firms that are producing the same product, are selling the same product, or offering the same service. Now, how useful is that definition anymore? So if I were to ask you what industry is Apple in, what would your answer be? Because Apple makes computers, it makes phones, it makes, it has websites where you go and download music or stream music. And it's also going to be creating original content for media. It has already signed up people like, Steven Spielberg and Oprah Winfrey and so forth for that. So what brings it all together? What industry are they in? What industry is Amazon in? Because Amazon is a retailer, Amazon is a platform, Amazon has web services, Amazon has cloud. And Amazon, sort of is also a streaming site and also creates original content for media. And of course, this is just the beginning. Amazon is probably going to venture into a lot of other things too. So how useful is the concept of industry anymore? So, and to me, it's not only quite unuseful now. It's not very useful, but also if you keep using it, it'll lead you to erroneous conclusions. And I would suggest that we discard the concept of industries. What is happening is that industry boundaries are dissolving, and they are dissolving into larger, almost galaxies that are called ecosystems. So ecosystems cut across traditional industry boundaries. And so this was an exercise about such an ecosystem, what is going to evolve. And it's not that, it's not a direct substitution for one product or the other. When these new technologies come in, they usually lead to a completely new ecosystem. And this will become clearer in a few minutes. And now, one of the things with ecosystems is that they're hard to predict how they will evolve. So how do we go about predicting, what an ecosystem is going to look like? And how do we decide where to position ourselves in that ecosystem? And who is going to capture value from that ecosystem? So let me give you an example. Take the example of the PC ecosystem, the personal computer ecosystem. There are lots of vendors in there, hundreds of vendors who supply the components that collectively create your PC. they all invest. They've all invested something in their businesses. Now, in terms of capturing value from from the sales of PCs, do they also capture value which is proportional to what they have put in? No. If you look at PC sales, basically two component providers capture the lion's share of the profits, and they are Intel and Microsoft. So what is it that determines who is going to capture most of the value in an ecosystem? And that was the exercise. So how are you going to capture value? And you were given different roles. So how are you going to capture value? And from this ecosystem? And I was looking through the assignments, and you've done a brilliant job in terms of the assignments. I mean, some of them are just completely outstanding, and even the firms themselves, would very much like to see them. And now, one of the things that sort of stands out from the assignments is, let's start with the incumbents. Okay? So the people who played the role of the incumbents, people like Ford, BMW, Aston Martin, sort of big brands, some of them with huge market share, some of them with, sort of a very successful differentiation strategy where they've been selling their products and their cars, being able to charge a huge premium. So how did the incumbents respond, right? What is the typical response of an incumbent in the face of a disruption like this? What do they try to hang on to? And what do they try to do anew? So one of the things that comes across from many of the assignments, not all, but many of the assignments, is that the incumbents like BMW, Aston Martin, they try to hang on to what they think is valuable. And above everything else, it's their brand, which they consider to be extremely valuable. And so they try to hang on to it. They also try to hang on to everything that makes their brand what it is. So that, sort of high-level precision engineering and high-performance cars, and, and they also like to hang on to the consumer segment that has been loyal to them. So number of different things. So when they start thinking like that, they essentially end up with something which is fairly similar to what they started out with. So now this basically sort of it tells us that in the face of disruptions, you need to be a little more flexible with your identity. So what many people don't realize is in 1997, Apple was nearly bankrupt. And then Steve Jobs came back and Apple started another sort of ascent, right from the ashes. What was the first thing he did? He changed the name of the company. It went from Apple Computer Company to simply Apple Inc. He dropped the word computer. That's a major shift in identity. I often talk to my students about my mortgage company. I have a 25-year mortgage. I'm 15 years through that mortgage. And so I've been a captive customer to this mortgage company for 15 years. Every month, they send me a piece of paper which says this much is paid, this much is left. It hasn't occurred to them to do anything else in these 15 years with a captive clientele, because they are very clear in their mind that they're a mortgage company. And that's what they know, and that's what they're going to stick with. So my question to you then is, sort of what is Apple's core competence? When it came out with the iPhone in 2007, how many people gave it a chance? Very few. Why? Because we are obsessed with core competence. We are obsessed with products. And a lot of the analysts said, Apple hasn't made a phone in its life, ever. What does Apple know about phones? And anything Apple can do, Nokia can do better. You remember Nokia? But Apple completely transformed the industry. Apple went into music. What does Apple know about music? Apple is going into content for media, making films. What does it know about making films? It is not so much in ecosystems. It is not so much about the competence. It is about where you position yourself in an ecosystem. So one of the things that people did was they started their thinking process in these assignments by putting themselves in the middle of the sort of ecosystem first, and then thinking about the ecosystem around them, how it's going to change. That is where the first major bias kicks in, that you are not even imagining a scenario, an ecosystem which doesn't have you. So I don't know, Clark, if we can share that ecosystem diagram with the participants.
Yeah, absolutely. There it is.
So this is one of the assignments. I think this is from Gavin Bonner, who did an excellent assignment. And what it basically does is it lays out the ecosystem in detail of what Gavin envisages the ecosystem to be. He was playing the role of Lyft, of course. And so it's not him in the middle, it's not Lyft in the middle, it's the consumer in the middle and everything else around it. It doesn't have actual names because we don't know who will actually be part of this ecosystem and who is not, but we do know the positions and their contributions. What services will they be offering, and what products will they be selling? So as you can see on the left side, there's energy, and so if you go upstream on energy, it has sort of generation, transmission, smart grid, distributed storage. There are implications that ripple through the entire value chain of energy. If you look at the right side, it's AV solutions, data platforms, hardware provision, and sort of the left. So that would be the the southwest diagonal. You have CP data services, you have fuel payment. All these are going to be now. This makes it very interesting, right? Because immediately you start thinking about, okay, so where is value going to actually accrue in this? Who will be in a more powerful position and who will be in a less powerful position? Who will actually own the customers in all this? So, what I mean by that is that, yes, people go and stream music. Apple doesn't produce music on, sort of Apple Music or on iTunes or wherever. Spotify doesn't produce the music, but they own the customers. And that gives them power. So think about, where will power be accumulated in this? That is the question that we should be spending most of our time on. Because at the end of the day, successful strategies are all about power. They should give you more power. You should choose a position for yourself that gives you more power. So take iTunes when it first came out. Before that, the music industry was essentially was losing its revenue. It was in a steep downward spiral. Why? Because of piracy. You probably remember Napster. Napster was shut down, but it completely destroyed the business model and it hurt the music industry really badly. So Apple comes in, introduces iTunes. Now people start paying and they start legally downloading music. So the music industry must love Apple, right? But the music industry actually hates Apple because Apple made them completely dependent on iTunes. Who had pricing power? The music industry had a very nice business model going where, they would sell you a CD for about 10 pounds, right? Or about $15, $16. And you only wanted to listen to 2 of those 10 tracks. But they were able to palm off 8 more tracks that you didn't even want to listen to you and make you pay for all that. And Apple broke that apart. It completely unbundled their business model. And yet they were dependent because Apple owned the customers. So who is going to own the customers here? How can you intermediate? How much value will accrue to the person who creates the battery? How much value will accrue to the person who basically manufactures the cars? Will we still have a variety of cars in BMW, Aston Martin, Ford, Tesla, joining the Lyft platform or whichever other Uber platform or whichever other platform? We don't even know if, sort of Uber or Lyft will be around by then, because Uber still is yet to generate a profit. So, so far we have been very patient with Uber, but we don't know, right? So these are all positions that are out there for you to reflect on, right? So where will value actually accrue is the question here, and which I would like you to think about. Right? We've talked about decision-making biases. We've talked about, okay, so now what you do, you're faced with uncertainty whenever a new ecosystem is evolving. The best way of dealing with uncertainty is by shaping the future. An uncertain future, you deal with it by shaping the future. Your strategies are going to actually shape the future. And there are a number of examples where, one thing that you do completely changes consumers' expectations of what to expect. So for example, eBay's star rating system, right? Now everyone expects that. So this has kind of disappeared. Okay, anyway. Okay, I'm trying to sort of go back to.
Would you like the ecosystem back on
old view? I'm just trying to go back to the old view. This kind of threw me off. Anyway, that's fine. We'll just continue. So eBay's star rating system, for example, completely changed. Apple's iPhone, a new product, completely changes consumers' expectations. And also because it wasn't just a product, it was actually a platform. So your strategy that essentially envelopes or surrounds your product is extremely important. It's much more important than the product itself. IBM's open architecture strategy, where IBM came up with a design for a PC and just gave it away for free. That essentially made PCs completely modular, and it created a new standard alternative to the Apple standard in PCs. So it was able to defeat Apple by creating an alternative standard and essentially create a whole flood of clones that came into the industry. So one company's strategy can completely change. So just imagine if you're a technology company like Tesla, but you stop making cars yourself. Instead, you create a large consortium of manufacturers, and you say, here is our technology for making self-driving cars. Okay. Now, we're going to keep the battery. That is proprietary, but around that, start making cars. You can basically replicate the PC experience in the car ecosystem, in the mobility ecosystem. Okay. So what's going to happen? Cars become standardized. Right now, the automakers have prevented standardization in the auto sector for decades. Why? Because when standardization occurs, the consumer benefits, but the producer loses out. Because the producers end up competing just on price. So PCs are modular, cars are not. You cannot fit Honda parts into Audi. You cannot put Audi parts into a BMW. You cannot everything is proprietary in these cars. And they all have different specs. Imagine if somebody comes in and standardizes the industry. What effect will that have on the entire industry? The economics, the fundamental economics of the entire industry completely change. Now, and if all those designs are based around the battery or around something else that is proprietary, that firm suddenly, like Microsoft's operating system, like Intel's microprocessor. So it would even be Intel's own microprocessor for cars, because the cars will need not just software, but also hardware to run on the roads, to be connected. So number of different things. Your strategies can completely change the direction in which the ecosystem evolves. And many of you did a very good job of actually sort of building on that. The other thing that comes across, so when I deal with companies or when I consult with companies, one of the biggest barriers in their mindsets and in thinking about disruption is that they keep telling me, back online. Hopefully you can hear me. So program support, are we back online?
Yep, can hear you, Kamal.
Okay, excellent. All right. So the obsession with product. Firms keep telling me that they won't be disrupted because they still make the best product. And I keep giving them examples of industry after industry where people who made the best product in their categories were disrupted. It is not about the product. Nobody gave a chance to Apple because, what did they know about the product? Okay, so what's going on? We keep going, off air. Anyway,
Yes,
so
sorry about this, everyone. Not sure.
Well, the program support would probably know, but hopefully everyone can hear. All right, can hear now. Okay, good. So it is, you may be making the best product, you may be making the best car. Right? Tesla could argue that they're making the best, but if somebody else comes in with a strategy of standardization, do consumers care what car comes to pick them up, what car they travel in? Maybe 5% do, maybe 10% do, but 90% of them, they want a good deal. So your strategy completely trumps your product, however good your product is. Now, the other thing that you must avoid is getting captured by your major customers or your existing customers. So one of the things that incumbents in this exercise also tried to do was retain their existing clientele, which is no bad thing. You shouldn't. I mean, if banks are threatened by fintechs, they would like to retain their existing clientele, but they should also know that they won't be able to retain all of it, nor should they try to retain all of it. So otherwise, you will essentially end up providing very similar products because these are people who like your products. Okay? So I was talking to some banks recently in Southeast Asia, and many of them said, "Listen, our clientele is of a certain age, okay? And they're not going to download apps, and they're not going to sort of be able to keep up with all that, and they still want a direct interface between our advisors and personal bankers and themselves. Some of them are high net worth individuals, so they don't really have time for this, and so on." So it's partially true, okay? That people with such clienteles will will probably live a little longer, okay? But their clients won't, unfortunately, okay? Because the next generation is coming in. And the next generation thinks that, would rather have an app than a real life advisor. Their behavior, their preferences are completely different. And this is what I try to explain to people I know who are running large healthcare systems, who keep telling me that no, our patients still like a doctor to come and ask them questions, a nurse to come and take their blood pressure, take their temperature, and so on and so on. I tell them, listen, that might be true for the current generation, and but that's certainly not true for the teenagers who are going to be your patients tomorrow, because those teenagers think, if you look around, maybe, hopefully it's not just my experience, and some others have had that experience too. For teenagers today, human contact is an intrusion. They would rather communicate through devices. So it's going to be, the behaviors are changing. Every day that we wake up in a different world. People's preferences are changing. There's a recursive relationship between people's habits, preferences, and the technologies and the technology affordances around them. Right? So be prepared to reinvent yourself. In fact, the challenge that banks are facing right now is nothing short of they just have to reinvent themselves. They have to reinvent banking. They cannot compete feature by feature. So, again, a lot of the banks that I talk to tell me, hey, what does Apple's credit card have that our credit card doesn't? Well, it's not about the credit card. It's not about the product. It is about the larger strategy. Apple might be in it just for the data. It's like retailers trying to compete with Amazon. Amazon is prepared not to make a profit. Are you? Because Amazon will use the customer base in other ways, whereas retailers have put all their eggs in the same basket. So I order more than 100 items a year, easily more than 100 items a year from Amazon. And I'm fairly sure that they're losing money on me because they absorb all the shipping costs. Every single day, if I order a book or I order something else from Amazon, they ship it for free because of Prime. So they're absorbing all this cost because they're prepared not to make money from retail. So it is about the larger strategy, because they can use me for selling, to sell other stuff. I also come across industries and companies which have essentially been captured by their major clients. So, an advertising company that I was dealing with recently, they have major clients, right? Warner Brothers, Disney, and, you name it. And they ask them to make certain changes to their product. And you can't really, it's a difficult thing to refuse a client as big as that. And so you make changes. And what I discovered was they ended up with about 350 different products. So very quickly, they had lost sight of their own strategy and they were just going with the flow. So if you get captured by your major customers, you will essentially end up, before you know it, you will end up running your customer's strategy rather than your own. The other thing, of course, is, and I will take only a couple more minutes, and then we can start coming to the questions, and the questions can start driving our conversation. So it's not competition as we have come to understand it, as we have come to know it. Okay? In ecosystems, you compete by collaborating, because it's not just about your product being better, it is about collective creation of value. It is about establishing particular standards. And you can only establish standards if you work together with people. And right now, a lot of companies do not have the capabilities of getting into these collaborations, making these collaborations work that they need to. So if you look at some of the successful products these days, they're all based on collaborations. So you compete to collaborate. So remember that. And also, so I want to reiterate one of the points, that it's not just about having the most advanced product. It is how you're positioning your product. And again, there are multiple business models that are possible. One is, of course, okay, so you are Waymo. You're in pole position to basically just control, to establish a platform, the operating system, perhaps even a variant of Android in cars, and the car becomes an app on your phone, right? And Google is already in your pockets, so they have a huge advantage there, right? But not everyone will be able to control and drive the platform. Yeah, there are other more possible models. So think of PayPal. What does PayPal do? PayPal doesn't care which ecosystem. What it does is it has a modular strategy. It goes and plugs itself into any ecosystem and handles financial transactions there. Look at Apple Music or Spotify. I mean, what role do they play? They bring the customers to the party. They own the customers. So there are various different things that you can actually do. In the PC ecosystem, it is actually proprietary technology that drives it, right? So because together, Microsoft and Intel were able to create the Intel standard, which became the heart of personal computers. So there are multiple different possibilities in front of you. And so we have about 25 minutes, I think, left. So let me stop here and let's look at some of the questions.
Yes, apologies for the background noise here. I can never guarantee quiet here in London. It's there's always something going on. So if you can hear a hedge trimmer, not of my doing, but what can you do? So thank you so much, everyone. We have some brilliant questions here. We'll try and get through as many of these as possible. We've got a good 25 minutes remaining. We'll start with a question that came in from Rich Carter. But this was a good one. Really ties into that visual we had from the lift assignment from Gavin. And Rich asks, how do we identify where value is or may be accrued in an ecosystem? How can we quantify that accrued value to enable future financial planning?
When you're faced with uncertainty, the kind of uncertainty that you have in nascent ecosystems, your guess could be wildly off because it doesn't just depend on you. This is very different type of competition. It depends on what everyone else does too. Okay? So they could come in and they could completely pull the rug from under your feet. So it's a dynamic game. And where value accrues keeps changing. So for example, I go back to the example that I gave you. In PCs, the value used to reside in hardware when everyone had basically unique hardware platforms. In cars, the value resides in hardware right now because everyone has unique hardware platform. Tomorrow, what you can do is you can shift the locus of value from hardware to software. So when people start buying cars or people start using cars, not because of the unique hardware, because somebody might have made all the cars standardized, but because of its compatibility with the other devices in your universe. So you might have an Apple car, for example, and all the Apple customers might go for the Apple car. If it's too expensive, Apple might come up with a new business model, a subscription model, or sort of a pay-as-you-go model, or something like that, right? Based on this whole trend of shared use of cars. So value, where it resides, will continue to change. Okay? So you have to keep on top of things, and you have to be asset light in most of these cases, which will guarantee some flexibility to you.
Okay. Wonderful. We've got one that kind of ties into that one from Christian Subero. His notes that it seems that companies have to be more flexible or open with their identity in an ecosystem world. There are fewer boundaries to change. In this regard, what are your thoughts about company mission, vision, and values? Are these still valuable resources today?
That is an excellent question, I think. And this is a question that I can guarantee most people, even teaching strategy, have not thought about, okay? Because not just this, but a number of different concepts that we used to teach in strategy classes, we are forced to throw out now, okay? And mission and vision and sort of, so this used to be a lot of the mission statements and a lot of the so let me go back to this question. This question seems to have disappeared from my screen. So I guess I don't know. Mission and vision statements, they were quite specific to particular industries. Right? And like I said, these industries don't exist anymore. So what is Amazon's mission? What is Apple's mission? So we simply cannot think about that mission, in the same way that we used to think about when Apple was just a computer company. And their mission was to put a PC on every, I may be confusing it with Microsoft's mission, but one of the two had, to put a PC on every desk and or in every home. And so completely evolved. Right? And they're in so many different things now that the mission, sort of has to be more flexible. So yes, I'm not going to say sort of, so what exactly your mission should be, but what we have entered is an age of platforms, okay? From products to platforms. And we're going to discuss that more in future sessions. But with platforms, one thing is very noticeable. Right? You can keep adding things because the asset that you have at the center of your business model are the customers. Amazon does not think of customers like our traditional banks do. So our traditional banks are very happy when they acquire a customer from whom they can generate a profit. Okay? And for Amazon, the product, or Google, even more so, the customer is the product that they're able to sell on to advertisers. So it is to create value, right, through different platforms. And within that, of course, we will have different missions.
Great. Yeah. I think we have two questions about disruption. Actually, no, three. One's just come in as well. One that I found is really interesting. We'd love to hear your thoughts about, from Joost Lindemann. It says, for most disruptors, the priority is to get a large customer base, not so much about making money, turning a profit anyway. Do you think this model will last, getting money to attract customers, and then sort of figuring it out later on how you're going to become profitable? Or is the tide turning? Do we have more expectations about when a company should at least break even?
I think that's again an excellent question, and wonderful question, because I'm sort of wary of predicting the future. I think it might turn, the tide might turn. It certainly doesn't seem to have turned, sort of already, because we already have Uber. How many years has it been around without making a profit? Amazon went about, 15 years without generating a without generating a profit? So yes, because these guys were very aware of Metcalfe's law, which is essentially, which tells you how valuable your platform is, because the value rises exponentially, right, with the customers. So, Metcalfe's law basically says that, when you have 2 nodes, the value is 10. When you have 5 nodes, the value is 100. When you have, 100 nodes, the value goes into 5,000 or, more than that. So people are obviously, and how much did Facebook pay for WhatsApp? $19 billion. What did they pay for? Because WhatsApp generates 0 return, right? 0 profit. So which probably means it loses money, because they must have some costs associated with this. So, hey, $19 billion for what then? It's for that customer base, which will be monetized. And Facebook is certainly in a position where they will be able to successfully monetize that. It depends on your strategy, really. A lot of the startups that I work with, their strategy right from the beginning is to get an exit. And in that sense, they know that once they get to that kind of valuation, that's all their investors are looking for. Okay? And then so it's a very different way of actually valuing these companies. What was this company that had, so Unicorn, I forget the name, but I just saw the figures somewhere. It had 13 people running it and had a valuation of $1 billion, right? With 13 people. And so even Facebook, right? I mean, the kind of valuation it has about, what, 20,000 employees, something like that. Its valuation might be double that of Walmart, whereas Walmart might actually have, a million employees. Compare that to 20,000. So the economics are completely different here. So the way, and so you could also think about it from the perspective of banks, because to banks traditionally, what was more important, your cash flow statement, your income statement, or your balance sheet? They used to go for your balance sheet, because if you go belly up, what do they get hold of? And now these guys have nothing on their balance sheets. So how do you value? So all these things, I'm afraid, sort of are changing. And what the final answer is going to be, we are not there yet. Okay.
Yeah. No, I don't think we were expecting a a one line answer that solves this and sets us up for the next century. So we've had a couple of questions about monopolies, actually, and it I suppose ties into what you were talking about a little bit there. Some of those advantages that platforms can have and how they can extend that. A question, the first one we had in actually from Kika. So working in the energy industry, and they're asking about what do you think of the still existent natural monopolies in that area. I suppose we can look at that a little bit and speak a little more broadly about monopolies that we see today and how these ecosystems might affect that, if that's okay. But yeah, we'll start with Kika's question. What were your thoughts on the monopolies in the energy industry?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in the energy industry. So Kika obviously knows more about the energy industry than I do, but I'll answer generally about monopolies. And that is something that the world, essentially a lot of the people in the world realized when the Justice Department sued Microsoft, okay, for monopolistic behavior. That was in the 1990s. Okay? And under Bill Clinton, I think. And so their charge against Microsoft was that they were a monopoly, and sort of. And now I know Kika is asking about natural monopolies, and what I am talking about are not natural monopolies. But I'll start here, and Microsoft, because some of our other participants might be interested in this. Could Microsoft deny that they were a monopoly? Because traditionally we have broken up monopolies. Okay? Microsoft could not possibly deny that they were a monopoly because they were on 95% of the world's desktops. Right? So what was their plea? So their defense was that, yes, we are a monopoly, but we are a good monopoly. We don't abuse our power. Okay? Because the example they gave was, what was the first word processing software that you used or app that you used? It was, for most people, it was WordStar. At least for me, it was WordStar. What was the market share it had? 100%. What came after WordStar? WordPerfect. What was the market share WordPerfect had? 100% of the word processing market. What came later? Microsoft Word. What was the market share? 100%. So what we have now are serial monopolies. Of course, the Justice Department said, well, makes sense, but how come we have just stopped at Microsoft Word? So is it because of your market power? And so on. Do consumers really have a choice? And so on. The other charge that they had was of bundling, of course, that you are integrating or you are bundling your internet browser, Internet Explorer with your operating system. And just because you have a lead in one race should not give you a head start in the other one. And so, because you won the first 100 meters, you should not get to start the next 100-meter race ahead of everybody else. So these are different markets. And Microsoft's response was, these are not a series of 100-meter sprints. This is one 200-meter race. And the Internet Explorer is an integral part They are not two different products. It is the same product, okay? And so on. With natural monopolies, of course, the situation is slightly different, right? Because they actually create value for consumers. But what we are going to see is that the entire industry is not going to be a monopoly. One part of the value chain might be a monopoly, and you can have a reverse, sort of bidding process for that. Who can sort of, do it the cheapest, for example, whether it's generation or transmission and so on and so forth. So you can actually have a merchant market in that to run that. And who owns, sort of the tracks? The railroad company does not have to own the tracks. So there are multiple different models but certainly in many parts of the energy industry, we are moving towards a more distributed model because the source of energy is becoming distributed, right? I mean, so as people move towards solar and wind and on and so forth, there might be more localized solutions to this than centralized solutions. So it depends on a number of things. I don't think I've completely answered your question, but that would require sort of, a whole new webinar. It's a big question.
Yeah, we're covering a lot of big topics here in a short amount of time. So yeah, I think some detail has to be left out, or else we'll be here till the new year. So a couple more really good questions here. Apologies if we don't get to one of your questions here, but we'll have plenty of time in the course to return to these topics. They're all really fantastic. I'd love to get through them. I wanted to touch on this one from Alfonso, which I thought was an interesting question. It brings us back to what we were talking about earlier. This question came in quite recently, and he asked, so as new ecosystems keep appearing and evolving, I think this will be promoting hyper specialization because many companies would like to be a key component that adds the most value. So position yourself in one area, really nail that down, become essential rather than trying to cover a lot of different areas. What do you think about that? Do you think this will even out the power eventually? What might be the impact of that thought? In fact, do you agree that that's a natural development in an ecosystem world?
I think another excellent question. And certainly ecosystems are appearing and evolving, but, what are ecosystems made of, right? Ecosystems are basically when cutting across industries. So a lot of these industries are disappearing into ecosystems. And a question to think about is how many ecosystems are we going to be left with? Because things are becoming part of bigger and bigger ecosystems. So banking might become part of the same ecosystem that your phone is part of today, or your computer is, or many other services that are being offered, sort of healthcare is, and so on. So you might have the same provider now, and sort of at the back of it all, you might have specialized providers. So I don't know if we will end up with hyper specialization, but yes, I mean, in certain cases, key components like batteries, for instance, it could happen that you basically specialize in batteries. But you see, there is also a flip side to specializing, right? Which is that you invest all your resources in a particular technology because you try to amortize your costs over as many different industries, as many different products as you can, which means your investment deepens and increases in particular technologies. And so I think companies will have to strike a balance if they want to stay alive, strike a balance between specialization and being very clear of what they want to do themselves and what they want to outsource. Because, yes, they're also making themselves vulnerable through hyper specialization. Because it is a risky strategy, but for the time being, it might actually have a very lucrative market, like batteries. Batteries, longer lasting batteries are required not just in cars. So, I live in Cambridge, and the Uber that I took yesterday, or no, it was a local taxi company called Panther. they have like 1,000 cars, in a small place like Cambridge. The driver was saying that the county council has told us that, in the next 2 years, all the cabs must be electric. And what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to sell my, sort of car and buy a new electric car now? How am I going to do that? So, and he said that, if my client, if you want to go to London from Cambridge, how am I supposed to take you to London? Because, I will need to charge the car, sort of in between. They're going to be queues and so on and so forth. So, so battery obviously is what we call in technology management a reverse salient, and that's kind of like a bottleneck, which is going to solve a lot of problems if we are able to come up with it, which is why Elon Musk is actually setting up a new battery manufacturing plant in Nevada, right now, and making a big bet on that. So yes, in many cases, hyper specialization might pay off, but it also comes with risks.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a question that builds on that actually when we're thinking about these notions of trying to pinpoint a point of entry into what's a new ecosystem or develop a new strategy. The most recent question we've had in from Abril asks, when designing a successful strategy, should we look to our competitors' disadvantages or weaknesses to identify a spot where we can add value beyond them, or should we create the capabilities to change or shift the market? How would we identify those points?
So, this is again a very interesting question. So should we look to our competitors' disadvantages or weaknesses, right? How about we look at their strengths? Because it is their strengths that we want to turn into weaknesses. So when budget airlines came in with a new model, how did they turn British Airways or any other established legacy airlines' strengths into weaknesses? Well, the fact that these legacy airlines had the most expensive gates, nearest to the lounge, was a strength for them. Their big brands in which they used to invest hundreds of millions was a strength for them. All their sort of, service that they used to offer was a strength for them. And how did the budget airlines came in with a model that turned all these strengths into their weaknesses? Right? Because they had to keep servicing the brand, they had to keep they had to keep those legacy assets with them, the gates and so on, because they could not take the service level down, because that meant losing all their existing profitable clientele. And the newcomers could actually do that. So think about what your competitors' strengths are and how you can get around them and make them redundant. Okay.
Very interesting. I was actually taking a note of that one, maybe think of something I'm working on at the moment. So yeah, quite a good timing. We have a question here that it came up in the chat, but thank you for reposting it in the Q&A. Bit easier to govern things in there. From Sukhvinder, very topical. Is that, Kamal, can you comment on Nike's strategy to select a tech executive as their next CEO? Been quite a big story this week.
Yes, and this is very interesting, right? And all the more reason why people should be taking courses like these. Because technology is essentially, there was probably one of the most cited op-ed pieces in the Wall Street Journal was written by Mark Andreessen, who used to be the CEO of Netscape, which was the original internet browser before Internet Explorer. Okay? And the title of that op-ed was "Software is Eating the World." And that has never been truer, okay? Because software is pretty much driving everything that we know. And if your CEO, so Apple, right? So I told you earlier in the conversations that in 1997, Apple was bankrupt. Well, who was in charge? Those of you who have read the book or sort of seen the movie would know it was John Scully. Where did John Scully come from? John Scully came from Pepsi. Why would you get the chief marketing officer of Pepsi to run Apple? Right? Because Steve Jobs also thought, just like many others, that Apple was essentially a brand. Right? And you could put a piece of that, a picture of that, or a sticker of that half-eaten apple on anything, and that would sell. And who knew more about branding than the chief marketing officer of Pepsi? And that's why but one thing Scully did not understand was the technology, right? And later on, after he had been fired by the board, he did give an interview in which he said, I should have basically tried to understand the technology better. Okay? Because a lot of these decisions that these guys have to make, especially with platforms and so on, they require knowledge and skills that are more sort of not just, you don't have to be a techie, you don't have to be a coder, you don't have to be a computer scientist or a, electronics engineer to understand, but you need to have a much better grasp of the technology that underlies your products than you used to. You were able to get away with this stuff, but not anymore. So yes, I think that's the way to go.
Wonderful. I think we have time just to squeeze in one quick question here. It's one been saving, quite succinct as well. So quite a quick one. But Ian asks, do you see that where power accumulates and where value accumulates, so coming back to our ecosystem here, as the same thing? Has the language shifted from value to power?
We're back online. Clark, you there?
Yeah, I'm there. I thought you were just very, very, very still for a moment. I didn't realize it was frozen.
No, I don't know what's going on because the internet is working fine at my end.
Yeah, we have the occasional things with Zoom on this, so yeah, apologies everyone. Yes, so our final question here from Ian. So do you see that where power accumulates and where value accumulates are the same thing today? Has the language shifted from talking about value to talking about power in this ecosystem world?
No, it hasn't. The language hasn't shifted. This is just the language that I use. And it just simplifies things in people's minds that what should a good strategy, how do you differentiate between a good strategy and a bad strategy, right? To me, there is a very simple difference. A good strategy should tell you how you will gain power as a result of that. Power over whom? Power over your competitors, power over your suppliers, power over your customers. Okay? So Apple enjoys that kind of power right now. Okay? It has a very, sort of clever strategy. They have power over you as the users. It's not very easy to leave the Apple universe once you've become part of it. Right? It has power over its suppliers. And of course, it has power over inside the ecosystem, over everyone else. And your competitors are not the people who are making the same product as you or offering the same service as you. Competitors are people who are vying for customer value with you. So they want value to accumulate in other parts of the value chain, whereas you don't. So everything you do must be about accumulating power. And that in itself will translate into more value.
Yeah, well, thank you for clearing that one up. We've had quite a lot of topics that we've gone through today. Thanks so much to everyone for their contributions. Really, fantastic assignment submissions. First of all, yeah, I think we were both very impressed with the quality that came through. It was great to see, especially quite early in the course as well. Thanks again for all your questions. I know there are a couple we didn't get to touch on. We have kind of noted those ones. We'll return to these topics throughout. I'm sure you understand. We get a lot of them. We try and do as many as possible. But most of all, thank you so much, Kamal. We really appreciate you taking the time today and giving us those insights. Great to hear from you.
It's an absolute pleasure. And these are some of the best questions that I've ever come across. And some of the assignments were also simply outstanding, best ones that I've ever seen. So obviously a very clever bunch of people here.
Yeah, been learning quite a bit myself reading through them. So been really, really impressive. So excited for the rest of the course, everyone. Hopefully you're all enjoying things so far, obviously taking it all on board. Have a wonderful weekend and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks again, everyone. Speak soon.
Bye. Bye.